talking about practice. Not a game, not a game. We talking about practice. Practice, man.
Hello, friends. Today we're going to talk about a topic that has certainly confounded me in my work, and I think will be of interest to anybody who's trying to draw beautiful women for comics, for pinup art, any kind of illustration, or for concept art in video games, and trying to make compelling female figures that modelers can then implement. And that topic is the SCM, or the sternocleidomastoid region of, in particular, the female anatomy. And you can think of it as the upper part of the cleavage. Many men are familiar with the boobage region, but especially as a woman gets older, there is a larger and larger portion between the neck and where the boobs start. And frankly, that's what you tend to see when a woman is dressed, even in a sexy gown. So drawing it accurately is the key to scenes where a couple is sitting at a dinner table and you're trying to make them look elegant. And that's going to be the topic of today's video. For these examples, I'm using a great Instagram account I found. Thanks, Santasaur Art. The way he has this page organized, first he has some photos that he has traced over with the anatomy. Then we see the actual anatomy isolated. And then there's a nice trace over with just the important parts indicated. And that's really what we're going to try to achieve a little bit later on when we look at some real photos. An elegant line drawing with just enough indicated that the anatomy is right without making it too much so that it's unsexy.
We talking about practice. Practice, man.
I want to start with some anatomical studies where we can identify some commonly used or commonly seen shapes that seem to appear in poses that we're going to be using over and over again. Identify those shapes, and then if we can draw them accurately, we can then apply them to some real life photos a little bit later on. These are real life photos that we're looking at. These happen to be very effeminate young men, and so for the purposes of a general model that will work for both men and women, I think this will do. Anyway, let's start by looking at what we're doing here. I do have a little bit of a pencil outline started off here just so that it's not this video isn't like a total disaster, but we know that we're going to start with some kind of a silhouette here. And I'm using a brush because I really want to try to maintain, even as we're just kind of sketching here, some kind of fluidity to the line, some notion of beauty or elegance, because otherwise an anatomical study can be very brutal, and you lose all sense that this is actually supposed to be a sexy woman. I'm not worrying about details or hair or anything. I'm just trying to sort of figure out the main geometries here. What is going on? All right. We know that there's going to be a jawline. Most of us in our drawings can get that. And the jawline does set a couple planes in motion. Here we know from the jawline that there is going to be a plane here, and there's going to be a plane more or less perpendicular to it, and that's going to be the neck. But it really doesn't happen at a right angle, as we can see here. The role of the sternocleidomastoid, the SCM, is to mitigate this right angle between the top of the neck and then down here and then the chest. There's something going on here, and that's what we're going to try to address. The first is this large muscle that kind of goes from the back of the ear down and meets, not quite at the midpoint, but almost. And there's that almost. And you can feel that in the pit of your neck. Mine happens to be very pronounced. And in the model that we're going to look at a little bit later, it's also pronounced. But these two main muscles, cords, meet right there. And then there's the collarbone. And it is true that elegantly depicting the collarbone is going to be something we're going to have to look at. In a lot of women, a pronounced collarbone is very attractive. And getting the shape right and balancing the shape of the collarbone with the shape of the outside trapezius muscle is going to be a thing. But this is just our first example. So from this example, we really have, let's see here, we really have a couple things in play. We want to understand this shape and the geometry of it. It's not flat. This is a rounded surface that is kind of coming into the top of the jaw. We want to understand that. Okay, that's going to be one. We want to be able to depict these right. Not everybody has brutal chords, you know what I mean? Overdoing that will make your women look unsexy real quick. And I think the same applies for these. We want to get those right. And we want to understand what is going on here in the middle. How much detail do we want to get? This is another example where putting in too much detail will make these areas seem very unsexy. So we want to understand them, but we don't necessarily want to render them too finely. Getting the proportions right and getting the basic negative shapes are going to be key, because we really can't anticipate what pose we're going to need going forward. We just want to have a couple tools in our toolbox so that whatever pose we want to do, we can get the basics down. I started with some light outlines, but let's talk about how I arrived at them. Almost always when I start drawing a head, I try to start with this rectangular shape. It's really a brick. It's not a square. It's not a shoebox. It's a brick. And that is the best approximation that I can kind of imagine for the shape of the skull. It's brutal. It's not your final thing, but it helps you position the skull in space. What are we dealing with? And from there, you can be a little bit more elegant and define how you want the jawline to kind of come out of that brick. In most cases, I feel like if you can get a decent brick and a decent jaw, you kind of have what you need to get the rest of the head in there. Okay, once you have a jawline, let's then talk about the major shapes again. Whether or not somebody has a pronounced Adam's apple, this is an important shape. The one that is made between the two bands, this shape right here, the one that I identified earlier here in red, this is something that, if well done, is a focal point for rendering a beautiful woman. And if poorly done, is the first warning sign something's off. I feel like our eyes kind of work that way too, with apologies to the trans community. As someone who likes to kiss a woman's neck, I can then say almost the same thing for this. Having this curve right, and how it plays off this curve, are important. And so too, this is the trapezius muscle in profile. We're kind of looking this way into the scene. And that's what the trap looks like, and in perspective, that one is kind of that way. Remember, these two muscles don't meet in the middle. There's a pit here. And again, that pit too is something we're going to look for. And then the collarbone must connect these two things. What I think is interesting about our anatomical study there on the left is that there's not a lot of shape in those collarbones, and yet they still get the job done. That may be because, again, these are very effeminate males, but we'll look again at some female models a little bit later. So for us, the important shapes then are this and this. That for sure. And then getting these right. And not overdoing it. Not overdoing it. Let's look at one more pose of this set. All right, here we have a little bit of the back musculature. I guess I'll draw it from scratch. Maybe not right there on that. Okay. Let's start again with the brick. And we're going to locate an ear somewhere in there. And the eye level is about there. I want to understand that back shape. This is the pit of the neck. And what we're learning here is that there's a line of symmetry, and that there's a musculature that goes down either side of it in a diamond, and that comes off either end. See, I'm using a brush, but I'm using it loose here. I'm using it loose and fluidly. The ear is here. Again, we're not worried about an ear shape. We're not worried about any hair that might be up here. It's not important. I want to say that this area, though, my goodness, imagine a scene where a man is kind of here and he's looking at the woman. This is very, very important, and getting it right. Imagine her hair is gathered up on the top. Getting it right, crucial. So beyond the ear, then, there's also that, right? That. Not too much. That's probably a little bit too thick. We want to make sure that the neck has room here. It kind of comes up. And then here's your jawline. And this is actually a great study in blocking in the jawline. Remember, this is going to be rounded. This is not a flat line. It's rounded. But this jaw, I think a lot of us want to make it, but that's not going to work here. You see, that's anatomically not going to work. The jaw itself comes out like that. You know what I mean? There is a forward thrust to it. And this area is often thrown into shadow. I think I made these chords a little bit thick for a woman, but we're getting the right ideas. This shape, not making it too thick, is essential. Balancing it with that shape, right? My line of symmetry is not directly in the middle, but there has to be a line of symmetry down the middle, bisecting this diamond. And again, we're not necessarily going to be putting all these contours in the final rendering of a real person, but have them there in your underdrawing so that maybe you throw in a little something like that in the final rendering in the right place, and it has great effect. And then I'm thinking that this maroon is a little bit too dark, so we're going to try this. This here. Okay, there's a couple elements here that I think we have to get right. First, let's make sure that we're positioning our brick right. Her head is tilted a little bit down towards us. That's why we can sort of see the top of the brick. That's the brow line. And those are the eyes. Some kind of a nose there. Okay, now I want to make sure that we get our jawline. And these are the main pieces. The 1, 2, that nice silhouette. Notice how it kind of gathers back there. That's the shoulder. Here's the collarbones. You see that shape. And something that I really want to make sure that we get a hold of later, this plane. Which is probably going to be very difficult to shade, but making sure that this right here, the cleavage, is right. The other area right there, and then that cheek. Let's go over it with the brush. I don't make beautiful drawings when I practice. This is one of the reasons I've never become an internet phenomenon, one of the reasons, because my sketchbooks are ugly. I go over the same drawings over and over and over again. I try to imagine myself touching the figure with this line and tracing it as nicely as I can. I'm not necessarily showing these drawings to anybody, at least before today. This shape is difficult. I would imagine if we drew it through, it truly is an S curve like this. That even women have an Adam's apple. It's just not pronounced. The thing is that the jaw obscures that. So what we're really seeing is that. You know what I mean? To make a basic kind of form out of it. And then I think it's important that we don't make the neck too thick. In all of these examples, especially on this girl, this area, making that too thick is the difference between men and a woman. That's the collarbone. And we're coming on down here as elegantly as we can. There has to be a shoulder. And then I guess you have to show some part of the trapezius, although in my opinion I've already made it way too thick. Some of this is going to be dependent on lighting, of course, but we're just assuming what they call studio lighting and just enough line work to define the musculature. Let's see how it's handled below. We don't have this. Maybe we do need to capture that, but I think that makes it too much. Yeah, there we go. Here, I guess their rendering doesn't include either of these because often the light kind of gathers there, and that part is going to be light. And I definitely made this curve too thick for an average woman's traps. CrossFit class let out early today.
We talking about practice. Practice, man.
Okay, here we're dealing with a real woman and real anatomy, and a couple things stand out. The first is that the muscles, these cords of the SCM that appeared so pronounced in our anatomical study, are really very, very thin and have to be handled, oh, there you go, much better than that on a real example. And the throat area of the woman, although there isn't a bump of an Adam's apple, there's a roundness there that needs to come out. And that roundness really has to sort of show here at the top where it intersects the plane of the chin. There has to be a bit here of the chin on that side. There has to be the roundness, ever so subtle, and then that. And as we can see here in Barbara's example, roundness that way, not the center of the circle is over here, not over here. There is not a pronounced cord here. What we do see is a little bit of skin wrinkles that help define the roundness. And then, of course, this area here. And maybe you want to put a little bit in here, and then hair models the entire rest of the form. And that, of course, is a whole nother topic for another video. And then on this side, we don't want to put too much in. We want to keep it very elegant. That's maybe even a little bit too much. But I wanted to put the drapery in the way that that strap comes not quite off the shoulder, but off of. We as men, I think, are very have a tendency to put that strap right here, like it's a basketball jersey, but that's really not the case. This is a plane. The shoulder starts here. The top of the shoulder starts here. What that kind of means for us is that the shoulder is connecting on an angle. You know, this area here and this curve here. You see, there's a bit of travel here as you travel down. I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but as we learn in Mike Matisse's force drawing lectures, a little bit of exaggeration on these important points can make the drawing and the pose really stand out. I think here it's important that we start with this pit right here. As we saw in our anatomical study, the two cords of the sternocleidomastoid meet, but they meet in a sort of pit, not in a perfect point. If we start there, we can kind of pull those up, and realizing that our ear is here, like that, and then take into account that split and the trapezius here. And that curve, as beautiful as it is, it ends in that collarbone. And then that collarbone follows right down to basically the same region, not quite there, maybe more like that. It's interesting here the collarbone, which has plenty of opportunities for a lyrical line, need not have that much of a lyrical line. Get it in there, make sure that it meets the points that it's supposed to meet, and don't maybe worry about making it a perfect S-curve, because as we can see in the real model, a very lovely model, it doesn't really have an S-curve. It's very lumpy. Okay. This is the region that I want to focus on there. The chin is coming forward. I think as artists, we're very tempted to just have it jut forward like a right angle, and then maybe put a black shadow under there. But we see that there is a little bit of curvature there. And I feel by including it and maybe having the jaw connect to that instead of connecting here, you're getting a much better figure drawing with maybe more detail in an area that is worth looking at, and not just obscuring with black like I just did. I can't say this looks very good. Let's see what can happen if we put a little shading on there. Let's see here. In this photograph, the light is coming from the front, so let's capture the edge of that, edge of that. Maybe throw that into shade. What I'm trying to capture here is that this is that shape that we saw earlier, connecting into the jaw. Well, it's not a beautiful drawing, but I do feel like I'm understanding what's going on here a little bit better. In Barbara's case, there's an opportunity to do some nice rendering here. I wouldn't, again, put these black lines the same way I did. I don't think that really works.
We talking about practice. Practice, man.
Here's the moment you've all been waiting for, the bikini pic. And the reason why I chose this particular pic, which is the same reason that I'm not telling Barbara that I'm using these photos, is because it's indicative of a pretty common problem, which is oftentimes your anatomical reference is going to include a lot of information that we don't actually want to put in the final drawing. This is a great pose. You could use it on a drawing like this. He's putting a necklace perhaps around her neck. But in order to get it right, we're going to have to kind of filter some things out. And let's try to do that. This is a definite point here. Certainly I haven't done a good job of these S-curves, but they are there. These wrinkles in the neck. And that is a strong point. And there is a bit of trapezius there. And in this particular pose, you know, she's laying on the beach, so her chest is thrust forward a little bit. Those collarbones are very high here and here. And the neck starts here, this cord, which is a lot thicker here than it was in some of the other poses we saw. It drives down very hard here. And then there's that shadow here. It's being cast because the sun is coming, you know, hard that way. And then there's that shape again, because remember, we are dealing with a thing here that is being shaded, you know, I don't know, maybe not that much, but it is being shaded by the sun, and we're capturing some of this. And then there's that bit of neck there. And handling the underside of this chin is certainly a delicate thing. I want to try to capture the idea that there's a cylinder here, and it's intersecting that trapezius shape that we identified earlier. And then this very hard shoulder. And you know, there's a lot of interesting anatomy here. This is an interesting pose for a lot of reasons, but we don't have to go into all the different things. That'll have to be for another video. I want to focus on this region here. Right, this video is not about boobs, but we can imagine, and then capturing this line right here is important. Whether or not it's part of the actual bikini, just for our own understanding, this roundness in the torso is perhaps best expressed at this point. If you think about that area at the top of your rib cage, that's when you're really getting, in a female form, a good idea of the roundness of the rib cage without a lot of other things obscuring it from the inside. One of the nice things about jewelry is that the jewelry can be used to show the form. I think in this pose, other crucial things, if the video was about it, we would be about getting that plane of the mouth right. That curve conforms to the cylinder that is the head. And then making sure this is right, because this is pointing that way, and it's defining the right angle between the nose and the plane of the face. And the way this follows, these must follow. But that's perhaps for another video. You can see a little bit more shading there. It doesn't hurt. It's the type of thing you take a chance with in your drawing, and 90% of the time it ruins it, but there it really doesn't. By putting that little bit of shadow there, I am helping thrust the chin forward. You really want to be careful though. Maybe you define the chin, you put a little bit of a core shadow in here. Top part of the lip. But you want to be very careful about that. I did a video on core shadowing earlier. It's worth checking out. Okay, family. We have done some good work tonight. We looked at some anatomical examples, and we broke down some of the major muscle groups and areas of the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid region. This region right here that is both essential to a good figure drawing and so very difficult to capture in a way that preserves the femininity of the figure. And we looked at some actual examples of a very beautiful woman, and we tried to turn them, for better or for worse, into drawings. And a lot of the drawings were ugly, and I can't wait to throw them away. And I think that's the final message I want to leave everybody with who's made it this far, which is the idea that you're always going to be making beautiful drawings, or that the purpose of your sketchbook is to impress your friends on Instagram. You know, that's the new generation. Maybe that is the case. But the way that artists have always gotten better since the beginning of time is keeping their sketchbooks private and doing a ton of terrible drawings in them that they never want to show anyone. And there's nothing wrong with that. A beautiful artist named Tim Evatt once told me that you have to do 1,000 bad drawings for every one good one. And he was the type of guy who really did practice that much. So if Tim Evatt is doing 1,000 bad drawings before he does a single good one, then you can definitely do a few bad ones in your sketchbook and not show them to anyone. So what I'm saying is, on the continuum of art, where here's the starting point, and here is a good-looking drawing, or as good as it's going to be given your level of skill at the moment, don't be afraid to take it over here and ruin it by trying out a bunch of stuff that might not work, because that's where you learn, and eventually you'll get here with your level of skill and the drawing will be good. Happy drawing, and thanks for following me. Please hit subscribe, and I look forward to the next video.